Hey, Brian, welcome back to the WP Minute.
Glad to be here.
Today, we are going to unpack the disrupt. Organize the disrupt? Disrupt 2024 just happened. An event I used to always mark on my calendar back in my more youthful entrepreneurship days in the startup world, and I would watch every single session going, how can I do this too? Fast forward to 2024, not so much anymore until, of course, Matt Mullenweg appeared in an interview talking all about WP Engine. When he announced that he was going to be speaking at Disrupt, half of me was like, oh, I wonder if he's just totally going to ignore the WP Engine stuff and just like talk about cool stuff happening with WordPress, kind of like we all knew it was happening in the background. But this interview with Connie Loizos was, number one, it was fantastic. Number two, it was actually a surprise that it was just purely about this current affairs that we're in with the lawsuit, with WP Engine and Automattic. And I really appreciated the 30-ish minutes. I thought it was all really well used and well thought out. And in today's episode, we're going to pull out some of those parts. Definitely link to it in the show notes. Go watch the full thing. We're not going to play all of it, but there are some key points that I think that I've highlighted that I think are would have been nice to know years ago, and also some clarity around like what's happening now. That's what we're going to do today. It should be fun.
Yeah, sounds good. You always like get concerned when a journalist interviews in your specific area that they're not going to have maybe the best questions or something like that. But that was not the case. I thought great questions, great narrative of the interview. So I think it was worthwhile for anybody to watch.
Yeah, this one, we always, we collectively in the community always sort of like point fingers, and at TechCrunch at times we're like, oh, you're not understanding how this whole thing works. Yeah. But this one was great. And we're going to just talk about some of the things that I found was interesting, and particularly, which I've never heard before, is Matt's approach to all things product. So let me just go ahead and play this little clip right here.
And so nowadays we have Tumblr, WooCommerce, which is kind of open source Shopify, only platform growing as fast as Shopify. Podcasting apps like Pocket Cast, Day One journaling. So we have a whole portfolio of everything. Basically, but the common thread between it all is we try to be privacy-centric, user-centric, and open source.
That's great. Parsley, we love Parsley as well.
Yep.
I totally forgot about Parsley, by the way. I remember that from years ago. But privacy-centric, user-centric, and open source. It's the first time that I've actually heard it framed that way, which was interesting. Like the open source part, yes, I know that, and I think everyone listening to this knows that. But the interesting part of just that little sort of throwaway statement is privacy-centric, user-centric. Those are the two that I've not. Specifically privacy. Like I know like the purchasing of text messaging apps and stuff like that were a thing where he was talking about like privacy and data security. And I know Day One is said to be, private and certainly user-centric. But that was just an interesting point that I thought I've never really heard him lead with all things Automattic.
Yeah, if you've ever had customers on WordPress VIP, you would not have forgotten Parsley because they are very aggressive on selling it in the VIP world. But yeah, that is I guess I would have never thought user-centric. That was the one that stuck out to me. But then actually you do think about it, like they really don't own things like that are B2B company. You know what I mean? Like he really does own a lot of user products, user software, and not like, I don't know. He's not out there selling to Salesforce or something like that, I guess. Sure. So yeah, I guess in the sense that, and it's like, I feel like I think I use everything he just listed right there. So
yeah, we'll start to dive. It goes right into, this whole WP Engine versus Automattic stuff, or Automattic versus WP Engine. And again, this is all her questions. This was the questions that Connie came with and the framing of it, and did a really great job with asking Matt some of the stuff. And I'll say, like, if you're interior to the community, like if you're someone, putting out the questions, I feel like everyone's sort of walking the plank these days, for lack of a better phrase. We all are concerned with even questioning this stuff. So it is great to see this a third party who's independent from WordPress that was, very well read into the community and what's happening, but also can sort of stand on their own two feet without concern of getting kicked out of Slack or WordPress.org. And that's the unfortunate thing that I think we're all faced with when we're commenting on this stuff, right? It's just the unfortunate state of affairs that we're in these days, but we're just reacting to the questions in this conversation. I'm priming it. I'm trying to prime as much as I possibly can here, Brian.
There's a lot of people who I see that they get blocked, and I kind of can't really comment. It's like, well, I don't know. You were a little personal. You were a little mean. I don't really think you should be surprised. But yes, there's definitely a general sense that even for people who just want to be supportive and you feel like, I just want to phrase this in a right way so that if any context gets stripped out, it doesn't appear like I'm worthy of being punished in the community.
So this is one of these segments where it would be like a nice to know many years ago. Connie tees it up with asking Matt about what's happening with WP Engine. She kicks it off with, you declared war using your own words on them, and skipping into his response a little bit here. I'm going to play this clip where they have a little back and forth.
And actually, we worked pretty closely with them since they're starting. We're actually a seed investor. But in 2018, we were kicked out and they were bought by this private equity firm, Silver Lake. And since then...
Can I back up there for a second?
Sure.
You were kicked out. So they bought your shares, but you sold them unwillingly?
Yeah, we would have loved to have remained involved, but Silver Lake kind of took it over. And like they've done with many open source and open companies, they've really taken it in a quite profit maximizing place.
So I've never heard of that before. Like somebody just, just gets kicked out. Obviously, I don't know like what happened behind the scenes. And it even seemed like Connie wasn't really sure. Let me just play that part one more time.
This private equity firm, Silver Lake. And since then...
Can I back up there for a second?
Sure.
You were kicked out. So they bought your shares, but you sold them unwillingly?
Yeah, we would have loved to have remained involved.
So they bought your shares, but you sold them unwillingly. Again, I don't know how that happens. I don't know if maybe at the time they were just like, oh, this Silver Lake company is coming in. I don't want to be a part of this. And then they sold, or they sold and got their return. Who knows? But I found that like a really interesting part for Matt to say, well, back in 2018, we were kicked out. I'd never heard about that before. And I hadn't really heard him say that up until this interview, in fact.
Yeah, that phrasing was new. I did see some people online saying there are ways where, depending on the types of shares you have, there are situations where it's not like unrealistic that you could be kind of forced into a sellout or something like that. So that it's, because like at first I thought, well, that just doesn't make sense, but I don't know enough about it. And there were some people saying that is something that is definitely possible and something they could have gotten wrapped up in. I do think though, like his phrasing of saying that WP Engine is an open source company is a little bit different, because I think the other times Silver Lake buys these companies, they actually get access to the open source projects. So they buy the company that runs the project or owns the project. Whereas in this case, WP Engine's not some open source company that owns an open source project. You know what I mean? So it's not like Silver Lake came in and bought WordPress. They bought one person in WordPress.
So obviously the conversation continues on. I'm going to play this clip where Connie tees up trying to get to the root of the issue.
So again, just trying to get to the root of, I guess, what's happening and how it gets resolved. So you're frustrated by some of the things that they did, including making the revision history harder to manage. I guess the question is, was that any of your business to start with?
What was any of my business? What do you mean?
What WP Engine does, how it conducts its...
Oh, absolutely, because they were abusing the trademark and creating a lot of confusion in the market.
And that's the crux of all this, right? That's what a lot of us have been saying, and is a root for not only this issue, but like the root of a lot of concern for any of us. And she does press him more about like what happens if somebody else is as successful or more than WP Engine. And this is the weight that I think a lot of us feel right now is like we're all looking at WP Engine going, what's going to happen legally? And we don't know for many years, which we'll find out later in this conversation, potentially. And that's the big thing. Like the phrase WP minute. Am I in the line of sight in all of this? WP beginner, like so many of us who have started WP something or something WP, for 20 years, a lot of us are thinking, can any of us go through this? And we just saw this too, unfortunately, with Jason Coleman and Paid Memberships Pro, where he decided to pull Paid Memberships Pro out of the WordPress repo, and the repository reported on this, that they saw direct messages from Matt to Jason saying like, hey, look, we might take over your slug, the permaslug in WordPress.org, take over the plugin, in fact. And that stuff is, alarming, to say the least. And I get it about the trademark abuse, totally get it, legally and on paper, but there's just a lot of confusion in the air about what is confusing, what is infringing, and maybe at the end of the day, when this dust settles, it'll be more clarity. But I think everyone's kind of sort of sitting on their hands right now.
I mean, I kind of get what he's saying about WP Engine's use of the word WordPress more than WP, like the actual WordPress trademark. And I mean, they did clean up their site since this has happened. They've been a lot more clear about it. They've changed the names of a lot of their products. I think it's not even really the worst argument. I think the part about the revisions, though, is this kind of weird tangent where I think part of his claim is that you can't take something that's GPL like WordPress, change the core software, and then give it the same name and still call it WordPress. You buy GPL, you have to rename it, give it a different name, and make sure that that's open source. But if you go to WP Engine right now, they're not giving you a different version of the WordPress core software. They didn't change WordPress core in any way. It's still the same exact WordPress core. They turn off revisions, but that's a filter that anybody can do. It's not changing core. It's actually a core feature to be able to do that. And so I think for a lot of people, it's like, well, part of it hinges on this idea that they're tweaking WordPress or bastardizing it, as he says. But I think that's one where it's just, I think you could just kind of just flat out say that that's not really what's happening. Whereas, are they using the word WordPress a little more than maybe they should be allowed to? I think he's on like firmer ground on that one.
I'll let that part of the clip continue to play out, to be fair, so he can state sort of like his side of it on the confusion. And that's going to go into another interesting point that I highlighted about 8%. But let's continue where Matt left off.
So if you look, actually, since this started, they've had, we estimate, tens of thousands of customers leave, and including, like, I had a friend of mine, Bob Perkowitz, who was in the CNBC article. He's a close personal friend. I've known him for 15 years. He had 8 sites on WP Engine. He thought it was me. So it wasn't until the story came out that he was like, oh. And so that was, he was one of the customers that has left. So, I think over the next few weeks, they're actually going to lose far more than 8% of their business. And so that's part of what they've said, actually, in their filings. That I think they had cancellations up 29%, everything. So I think that shows that as their customers are learning that they're actually not officially associated with WordPress. In fact, are attacking WordPress. They're moving off.
Okay.
So this is the interesting part that I highlighted. It's a longer segment.
So you wanted, so I don't think we established that you had asked them for basically 8% of either their revenue or 8% of the equivalent of revenue in like engineering hours working on the core. One of your biggest beefs with them, in addition to saying now that they were abusing your trademark, was that they weren't contributing enough to the WordPress sort of community.
Well, that's a way to put it. Yeah, I wanted to give them the option because I knew that we're going to weaponize this and publish it. So I wanted to say it's not just about the money. It's really about, like, if you're going to profit off the WordPress trademark, you need to be part of the WordPress ecosystem.
Right.
But also it was the WooCommerce trademark as well. So there's that whole other thing that they were abusing.
Just wondering how you settled on 8%.
Based on business analysis. So, if you estimate that would be about 32 million, they still would have been free cash flow positive.
So this is another part where it's still not clear for me. I don't know about you, but like this chicken or the egg kind of thing, is it the 8% that you want, or like the trademark agreement that you want? Is it the contributions back to open source WordPress and the community? That's the part that wasn't clear. It sounds like they were trying to do a deal for however long it's been, 18 months or something. Like, we'll get to that part. It sounds like they were trying to do like the trademark deal for a while. But what's not clear to me was, like, have you been an advocate for them to take part in this? Like, when you pulled out in 2018, when Matt pulled out and Automattic pulled out in 2018, did you start advocating then to do more stuff, to contribute more hours towards core, 5 for the future, more community stuff? Like, when did that start versus when I'm sick and tired of seeing you grow and not do anything, and now I'm just going to hit you with like this trademark and licensing deal thing, and I think again that's just another area of uncertainty, at least for me, to understand that timeline and why so many of us are scratching our heads.
Yeah, in other interviews he said that he went after the trademark as a way to apply pressure because they weren't contributing enough. In here, it sounds like he's saying, I added the contributing part later because I knew it would be public and it would look better, right. Is what it sounds like, right? It almost sounds like reverse.
Yeah.
And I know he said that the 8% is 5 for the future, 5%. But because that's normally staff hours and because they didn't want to put staff towards it, he would have to hire staff and manage them. And that's an additional 3% overhead of all the HR and everything that it requires to manage staff. So it's really 8% because that would be 3% for him to manage them and 5% for the actual staff working on core is, I guess, where the number came from. Obviously, the 5% is arbitrary too. But yeah, I agree with you. It's kind of unclear. I think everybody just wants to know, like, what is the ideal outcome here? Like, if you could have everything you wanted from WP Engine and you could win the entire situation, would it just be 8% of their revenue as a tax? Would it actually just be them contributing? Would it then be changing their name and just not being called WPN? Like, what is it's very unclear what he actually wants here. Yeah. I think he knows, but I don't think we know.
Yeah. And again, I'm trying not to play this whole interview, but I'll let this play out just in fairness.
And based on our estimates and the negotiations that we've had over the past 18 months, we felt like that was a fair amount. Because, by the way, if you look at their R&D, part of the reason they're so profitable is they don't have any IP. They don't create WordPress. They don't spend any money on the primary thing that they're selling to their customers. So if you look at any other tech company, they're spending way more on R&D. So this is basically kind of like their outsourced R&D cost.
Yeah, that's a tough one, right? I mean, they're spending on infrastructure, they're spending on humans, they're spending on the interface of, like, if you're just looking at hosting alone, not even talking about ACF and local and all this other stuff. But if you're just like hosting, they are spending there. So it's not like he's just trying to paint this picture like, oh, they're getting all this for free and it's like absorbing all this, this profit. I get what he's saying, but it's also like, that's an extreme in my opinion.
I don't think people go, I get his argument that people go there. People don't go to WP Engine and then they learn about WordPress and join the ecosystem. People who are already invested heavily in WordPress go to WP Engine and use them as a host. And so in that sense, they do get to benefit off the WordPress name. The second thing though is it's not just hosting. It's their hosting experience. They nailed developer experience a few years ago to a level that none of the other hosts did, which is why they got so popular. And has nothing to do with WordPress. It has everything to do with what it feels like to log into WP Engine, to launch a site, to spin up staging sites, to do all the fancy integrations that developers like. They solved that so much further that people aren't there because they're there for some WordPress software that they could get anywhere. They're there for the hosting experience. And I don't quite agree with this idea that they don't have to spend any money on that thing that they're selling, which is the experience of using their platform.
Well, they say that they say otherwise. They say they've spent hundreds of millions of dollars, developing their business. And they also say that they've contributed a lot to the WordPress community, plugins, other, sponsorship to WordCamp.
And this part is very interesting to me to hear him say this, but it's specifically this.
I mean, sponsorships to WordCamps are for advertising.
Mm.
That was a first, right? I've always looked at if you're sponsoring, especially at the prices these days, you are doing that. It's not, in my book, it's not an advertising play because I think advertising dollars could go a lot farther with a lot more impact than a WordCamp. In my opinion, was if you're going to sponsor a WordCamp, you're doing it to support the idea of getting in-person events, low ticket prices, 2-3 day events to support WordPress and not as an advertising scheme. Let me just let this clip play out.
So I think in total that they've ever sponsored since they started, I think it's around 400,000. And, there's other sponsors that would have happily had their space. So they're no longer allowed to sponsor, and already other companies have taken their spots. So it's really advertising. It's like if you had sponsors here, they're doing it not just out of altruism, they're doing it to get customers.
Okay. How dare you say that about our advertisers?
So yeah, I just don't buy it as a pure advertising play. I've always seen sponsoring WordCamps for the price point and for what you get in return as a way to support the community at large. That's my opinion.
Yeah, I kind of go back and forth on that one because it is advertising, but one is $400,000 of the sponsorship to the event, but that doesn't count all the staff you have to bring, the swag, all the stuff like that. And, the cheap ticket prices, the swag, the booths, all that stuff add up to the experience, the people, the WP Engine employees who've been speakers that get paid to go there. So there's way more to it than like we get to see their logo when we go to this conference. Just the ticket price alone, that to me is a sponsorship or a contribution because they're subsidizing all of us to get to go to WordCamp by sponsoring and keeping the ticket prices low. So I think, it's a little bit more than they just get to free advertise to a industry that's already so insular that we all know who WP Engine is.
Sure, right.
To begin with. This isn't TechCrunch with 10,000 people. This is a small insular group. So, yeah.
So they start to, talk about another area that was really under the radar for me, like trying to understand the foundation, WordPress.org, Automattic. You and I famously did about an hour and a half on unpacking a lot of this stuff in rapid fire. So a lot of the stuff we're learning about, Matt owning WordPress.org and running it directly and how the foundation works. And this is where Connie starts to get into that with him.
You wrote at the time that Automattic had transferred the WordPress trademark to the WordPress Foundation to ensure access to WordPress and related open source projects in perpetuity. You added, Automattic might not always be under my influence, so from the beginning I envisioned a structure where for-profit, nonprofit, and not just for profit could coexist and balance each other out. It's important to me to know that WordPress will be protected and the brand will continue to be a beacon of open source freedom, regardless of whether any company is as benevolent as Automattic has been thus far. It sounds to me like you were saying, take it, go. And now it sounds very much like the extreme opposite.
It's important to remember the context. So Automatic's been around for a while. I just celebrated actually 19 years there. So in 2005, when we started, I was 21. Our first round was 1.1 on 3.3. That was our Series A, by the way.
Good old days.
And as a kid, I didn't have control over the company. At the time, the investors controlled it. And we actually brought in a CEO, Tony Schneider, who actually won a Crunchy for CEO of the Year back in the day, I think 2008 or 2009.
I know, Tony.
And so, fast forward to today, I now vote 84% of the shares, so I have founder control again.
So the foundation and the licensing, they go on to talk more about it. Once again, definitely listen to the whole episode. I totally understand about the early days of Automattic. And so I'm trying to straddle both sides of the line on this one, where I can understand in the early days, it's easy to get the rug pulled out from under you, especially from investors, especially from people who are just looking at you going, hey, you got this big thing. You don't even realize it. You're building this thing. They realize it and they, take control. I totally get it. So on one hand, I'm like, it was smart of him to protect himself and WordPress like that in the early days. Part of me wants to believe like none of it was done with the intent of how it's rolling out today, but it's certainly at an advantage today for sure. So I really wrestle with like the formation of, the foundation. And I think I have, let me continue this clip because this kind of wraps it up.
So WordPress.org, again, just started with me registering the site on GoDaddy in 2003. And it didn't officially have a trademark or anything. The trademark came a few years later. So I've always just run it personally. And so I have a license to run it for WordPress.org. Automattic has a license. If the foundation has a 3-person board, I'm one of the 3. So it's truly an independent board. And then, for example, if I were not a good steward of the WordPress.org, website and trademark, the foundation could actually take it back from me and give it to someone else.
That was new to me. Like that last line right there, that the foundation could take that license that he was granted personally to run WordPress.org and give it to somebody else. The issue is, yes, technically on paper, it's an independent board because there's 2 other people, but he's also probably really friendly with those 2 other people. So Yeah, on paper, everything sounds like technically correct. And you would think that if he was acting in bad faith, that that foundation could take that license away from him on WordPress.org. But just a very convoluted web. I don't know how many metaphors I can throw at this. Convoluted web, slippery slope. Like there's just a lot here. And I think that it wasn't intentional 20 years ago for him to form it this way, but it has certainly played out in a surprising advantage these days.
I don't think it was set up for Matt. I don't think he set it up to give away any control. I think he's very known as a founder mode type of guy who wants complete control. And I don't really think that's even a problem. It's definitely more of a, like, in case of emergency break glass situation that it can be taken away from him, but it's not I have to make every decision go through some sort of board of people things. So I think it doesn't really change my perspective of Matt runs WordPress the way he wants to run WordPress. He always has, probably always will. I think that's still the same thing it was. I think, the board makeup obviously is really interesting because I don't think anyone ever thought about it before, mainly because no one ever really thought that anyone other than Matt could be in charge before. And there's a part of me that thinks, man, it would be great to have a real board of people who are actually invested in the WordPress ecosystem and familiar with it. There are two people who it seems like are not engaged with WordPress in any meaningful way. Their livelihoods don't depend on it or anything like that. So part of me thinks, man, it would be great to have, like, Yoast and Syed and Miriam Schwab and all these smart people make a real board of WordPress. But on the other hand, the other part of me says, well, those people all stand to make a lot of money based on these decisions. And maybe we don't want a group of people like that running WordPress either, Sure. So, I think it's Matt Turtles all the way down. And I think that's the way it is. And I've yet to see anybody step forward with a truly, meaningful alternative to that.
And I'm just going to play this for the listeners so they can hear the other two board members.
Who are the other two board members?
Shel Farley and Mark Gosh.
And what do they think of all of this?
Well, we just had a board meeting, actually, a week or two ago. We published the minutes on the WordPress Foundation site. They're incredibly supportive.
I want to move into, later, we're about halfway through the actual interview. And what I find interesting is, I don't know how well Connie knows him and like personally and how long they stayed in communication, but she generally seems concerned, as anyone would, like, if with any kind of like details into the situation. I mean, I'm concerned for his state of being able to manage all this stuff. I've always been critical of him managing too much. I've said this to him in one of the interviews I had with him, like directly said, I think you do too much. I think, how can you wear all these hats? How can you cover all of these products and these brands and this initiative? And you can start to see that come through in the conversation in this clip.
I did see that you tweeted that you're just celebrating your 19th year at WordPress. And there was some support, but much of it was, hugely negative. Like, we hope it's your last year, and we all hate you, dog. Sort of typical ex-fair. But how are you absorbing all of that?
Well, WP Engine's been very successful in their PR campaign, and they've drummed up a lot of the folks who are sort of they're trying to make this like a WordPress is in trouble or something. Now,
I haven't seen a PR campaign from WP Engine.
It's been challenging, to be honest, and I wear a Whoop. my recovery and sleep has been kind of weak the past few weeks, but it's been an incredible showing of support. So lots of other executives. I was just with Mark Benioff in Hawaii a few days ago. So the folks who like really understand business and other things have been very, very supportive.
So yeah, I mean, just generally concerned about like him managing all of this stuff, all under pressure. And again, it seems like, to his credit, which he brings up in the conversation, is like, hey, I'm out here doing press, I'm out here doing podcasts, blogging about it and tweeting about it. But there's also a lot of like crazy things that I see happening too, with people getting blocked, getting kicked out, banned, taking over plugins. It's just like, half of me is like, I can totally understand the pressure that you're under. How can we help you? But at the same time, like, the we is also getting attacked in all this to a certain degree. I really struggle with it, but it is interesting to hear, how she's also like looking at him going, you got a lot here, buddy. Like, can you handle it?
I felt that she was very concerned and not super excited with all the answers. Then again, I was on YouTube and there were people who were like, wow, she's a shill for WordPress. And read it the exact opposite as what I thought. I thought she seemed pretty critical, but about his point there about WP Engine and their negative PR campaign, which I don't think anyone sees that. I don't know that he sees it or if he's just saying it as part of like building his legal case, or if he truly thinks there's some sort of thing happening from WP Engine that I don't think anyone sees. I think it's just community hostility that's kind of always there under the surface. But the idea that he goes on stage and he talks about all of these things, I think is good. On the other hand, I don't know if you have this clip where she talks about the thing where he's supposedly hiring Heather Brunner, and she's, the CEO of WP Engine, and she says that it's not true at all. And they've only published one side of the text messages, and he says that there's another side of the text messages, but he's not going to show it until it gets forced out in legal discovery. And that's a situation where it's such a clear black and white, where one side is telling the truth and the other side is not. And he's right that they've only published some clips and not his clips, but he could, and he just hasn't published the other side of it. And so that's a situation where you go, well, I don't know. Are you being as transparent because you're doing all these interviews, because you're giving the same answers, and here's a situation that is very clear, show us the other side of the texts that they're not showing us and prove that you're right, and it's not happening. So I don't know.
They're about to get into that conversation. This is another important point where she asked for clarity.
But I guess, in the aggregate, is it worth it to even take that risk over this battle with them? And also, Matt, relatedly,
I obviously think it's worth it. Now, and again, if this were happening every year, there'd be something wrong with us. It's kind of like the old saying, like if you wake up every day and everyone you meet's a jerk, maybe you're the jerk. But if, every 5 or 10 years, we have something like this happen, I think that's probably about normal.
I guess for the developers out there who want crystal clear clarity, and I know you've been asked this before, and I haven't heard a really crystal clear answer. What is the threshold? So at what point did they overstep? What kind of guarantee can you offer to other people that this won't happen if they also become highly successful as WP Engine has become?
Well, like I said, there's plenty of other businesses which are just...
So that touches upon like what we were talking about before. At like what point do people realize that they might be in the crosshairs? He doesn't really give a great answer here. He doesn't really like highlight like how other people can do this properly or whatever.
Yeah, I think she just summarizes it right there.
Yeah,
this is the question everybody wants to know, and
yeah,
why isn't it answered? And he doesn't answer it.
No.
Looking to press, it's all going through their lawyers, Quinn and Manuel. So when you have nothing to hide, when you on the right side, I'm doing press, I'm doing podcast, I'm here, etc. When you have something to hide,
he said the same thing to us, by the way.
You have it all go through a spokesperson and your lawyers. So.
Well, people choose different strategies. I'm thankful you're here talking.
And I'll also say from the legal point of view, we had Neil Katal sign up to lead this case. He's one of the top lawyers in the country, Supreme Court board, worked under Obama. And he's actually faced off with Quinn Emanuel a number of times, as in won every single case. So I think from a legal point of view, we feel very, very strong as well.
Again, like he still feels really positive. I know his post that he put out, I can't remember, a couple weeks ago at this point, where he said he's going to be a little bit more quiet, which I also find a little bit ironic. Like he's going to be a little bit more quiet on the topic, but then showed up at TechCrunch Disrupt to talk about it. Whatever. I get it. It's a strategy. I get it. But I thought it was funny. I'd imagine if his legal team was like, we're in the wrong here, for the love of God, please stop talking publicly about this stuff, they would be saying that to him and he would be taking that advice. It's hard for me to compartmentalize or just to have the two lanes. That's where I think we all struggle with, me personally. The lane of Automattic versus WP Engine and Matt and the community. And those two things, parallel to each other as this all unfolds. Like I can totally understand the legal agreement or the legal argument and do all that stuff. I can't wrap my head around why we're beating up the community so much.
Yeah, because it is important that he didn't sue WP Engine or file a lawsuit. They filed the lawsuit against him. So all he did was go on stage, say some things that may or may not be like libelous, may or may not have extorted them for revenue. I'm just saying these are the charges. And then he cut off their access to a personal website that he owns that I don't think there's any reason he couldn't have done that. I don't personally. So, and then they sued him for this stuff. And so I think in his mind, and I think it really is a coin flip for a lot of people. Like they're kind of have this burden of proof to show that everything that he did was malicious and for some ulterior purposes, because they're the ones filing the lawsuit. And all he's doing is just not inviting them to his party anymore and gossiping about them.
Yeah.
And so, I mean, I kind of get why he seems a little confident.
I pulled this next clip just as like another interesting point, stuff that I hadn't heard of up until this conversation. This is about the alignment offers or realignment offers. I forget what do you call the alignment offer inside Automattic.
I was going to ask you, so subsequently, just to let everybody know, so there was a point where you offered people 6 months salary, and then you said, you know what, if you miss the window, I'm going to give you one more chance, and I'm going to let you take 9 months of pay.
Yeah. So that was kind of funny. So even after this 6-month buyout, we had a leaker at the company. So someone who was taking screenshots of like internal private stuff and leaking it. So I know you love leakers, but it kind of breaks the trust. We have a very high transparency environment at Automattic where basically everyone can see everything, all the revenue numbers, pretty much everything. So, someone breaking their confidentiality agreement is really, really tough. So I created this second buyout, basically just for the leaker, where I said, all right, it was a much shorter window. It was like a 4 or 5 hour window, and it was 9 months of payouts. And it was kind of funny. The leaker actually got in touch in the first hour.
Was that right?
And they confessed, actually. And I said, you know what? Great. I actually have incredible respect for this person. Here's the 9 months, and here you go.
So altogether, I saw a report that the 6-month buyout, around 8.3% of people.
159 people, yeah.
And how many more? Was it just the leaker who took the 9-month deal, or I'm assuming more?
So the first deal, we cut off your access the same day. The second deal, we said, hey, when the 159 left, we've actually seen a huge boost in business, so we're hiring as fast as we can. So for the second deal, if you're the leaker, we'll cut off access immediately. But for others, we might ask them to stay on, possibly until next year, just because we're very short-staffed right now. So we kind of need to hire. So there were some other people that have taken it. Our employee count is actually totally public. So
just a lot, like a lot of things there. Like the 9-month deal was really to unearth the leaker, which I don't see how that worked. Like that was the cheese the mouse went after. Like
there was a stick. It was a carrot and a stick because in his post he says, and if you don't quit, here's what's going to happen. So,
oh right, in the post that he put out about it. Yeah. Yes, that's right. So there was that, coming up with that plan to get the leaker, and then others who opted into it, it wasn't going to be so immediate, which kind of feels weird too. You're going to get your 9 months, but you got to hang out until potentially next year. Slightly awkward, I think, to set that tone, to be in the person in the meeting knowing you're going to take your 9 months, but you had to wait around. Businesses are booming, apparently, and you got to hire as fast as possible. So just a lot, a lot happening.
Because then later, I think it's later, he says that they were a little overstaffed.
Right.
And that part of it was that he wanted to trim down on the staff. Mm-hmm. And also, which I thought was a very interesting thing, where he says that he would actually thinks that they could do more revenue and maybe even cut the staff down further.
Yep.
Thanks to things like AI and stuff, which obviously I would never want to hear my boss saying, hey, I actually think that I'm going to need a lot less of you in the next few years. So stick around until I can replace you.
Here's one of the chaos theories of what happened early on, that potentially all of this was to drive down valuation of WP Engine so Automattic could acquire it. Let's go with some great questions from Connie.
I did see that BlackRock had marked down the value of its holdings to half of that amount, essentially, back in March. So there have been theories that this whole fight with WordPress was sort of driven by Automattic being in some sort of state of duress, wanting to drive down the value of WP Engine so you could acquire it. So do you want to can you tell me about your company's financial health, and also if there is any truth to your potentially wanting to acquire this company.
Yeah, what can I say about that we've said publicly? $500 million in revenue. We haven't raised any primary capital and have no plans to. So, running at break even or better, and hiring aggressively and growing very fast. So.
And what about WP Engine? I mean,
That's a
you
great
have
non-answer.
talked here today and in text and tweets about how people are leaving WP Engine, and it's probably not worth what it was worth when Silver Lake invested. And
it's been widely rumored that they were shopping around and trying to sell WP Engine earlier in the year, trying to get a $2 billion valuation. They obviously weren't able to do that. And, I talked to one of the private equity.
First time I heard that $2 billion valuation being shopped around.
That
I heard shopped around, but not $2 billion.
And they said part of the reason they didn't buy it is they were like, well, they don't have any IP. And what's going on with this trademark? They don't have a trademark license. So I think that's part of what's happening. I'm actually very surprised that Silver Lake hasn't come back to the negotiating table.
Is there IP in open source world?
Well, I guess just the trademark
Right.
is what he means.
Because I do feel like if I were valuing WP Engine, it would be under their revenue right now, because they're not growing anymore. They're in this legal battle, which I think they're going to lose. And yeah, they're losing a lot of customers. So we'll see what happens. They're either going to, like I said, we're at war with them, or they're going to go brick by brick and take us and other companies, take every single one of their customers. Or
That's a pretty scary statement.
yeah, hopefully if they could end this all tomorrow, but happily negotiate. Heather, Lee, if you're watching this, happy to talk, to reach me.
And it was at this point, I'm just like, this is where I really started to feel like this is all just to get to the negotiation table. And it's just a ton of cannon fodder. Mm-hmm. This is just really like the dark side of business, and really starting to feel the weight of that against the backdrop of the WordPress community. I feel like this is still him saying, come to the negotiation table, we can figure something out. And it's just who's gonna fold first. Neither one of them seem like they want to do, though he's publicly saying that he could do it. And it's just like, man, if all of this is just to get to that if all of this is to buy WP Engine, damn, that's going to feel incredibly, incredibly difficult for the community to swallow. But also, it's just like doing all of this just to get that 3% at the end of the day. Like if that, you're going to negotiate that 8%, what are you going to settle for? 1, 2, 3%? Like what's the number? It's so hard.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, I just, if there was that answer to that first question, be crystal clear about what you're expecting from large companies, I think most people would be on his side. They say, okay, well, he laid out the line. This is what it is. Agree with it. Don't agree with it. So obviously, even him I don't want him to take over WP Engine. I don't know that I think Automattic is going to do a better job than Silver Lake at this point. But the other piece is just, I understand that all of this is to put a ton of pressure on WP Engine and to really break them down, steal their plugins, fork their code, cut them off, slander them, do all these things, trying to break them down to a point where, Silver Lake just wants to pull out and just drop the asset. Like you said before, it doesn't make sense what that has anything to do with the interactions on social media and in Slack with contributors and community members. I just don't get how the two have to be related. Why we have to get one with the other. Why can't you just do the one and not the other?
Speeding this process up a bit, they started talking about what would happen through this injunction. This is where he talks about getting access back to WordPress.org. Let's have a listen.
And if we lose the injunction, what happens? Well, we have to go back to the state of what they were doing beforehand, where they access WordPress.org. So that's fine.
I thought that was part of the problem. I thought the fact that they had access to WordPress.org was part of the problem. And he's just like, yeah, that's fine if they get access to it back. Does that mean they get ACF back on WordPress.org, or they can just use the mirror? So difficult to understand. And then here's the part where we start to realize that this could take years.
Yeah. So, the estimates I've heard from Neil and others is that, worst case scenario, if we lost everything, it would be kind of happening in 2026 or 2027.
Wait, say that again? If you lost the battle, it would take until 2026 to resolve?
Yeah. If it goes to jury and everything like that, yeah. That's just how the legal system works. If you look at the legal cases, they take a very long time.
What do you do? Again, I can't sort of emphasize enough how much animus toward you I'm seeing out there.
And also lots of support, but we notice the negative a little more.
Yes, but really, I mean, it seems really, it's just so curious to me that it would be worth it to you to pursue this for 2 years. I guess in the meantime, how do you manage sort of, that community that's very frustrated with you with handling this lawsuit and pushing to Automattic forward for the next couple?
Well, we're trying to do some press, right?
Yeah.
So, which hopefully translates some of the story. There's actually going to be some cover magazine articles coming out, which is pretty exciting.
Yeah, it's so tough. It's so absolutely difficult to hear that answer. To once again, putting myself in her shoes, to how do you ask somebody this question? Like, look what you're doing to all of these people because of this, and now you want to take it for years? Like, can you mentally handle that, number one? Is it worth it business-wise and financially? And then number three, like, you're doing this all at the cost of this community? Like, why is this happening? Is the community stuff just the theater of the courts where you need to say, I'm blocking all these people, look at all these people attacking me, hundreds and hundreds or thousands of people I've had to block for air quotes attacking me, just to build like that long laundry list to show the court and say, this is what's happening. All of this is worth it? Question mark. Even she's struggling with it. And then this was funny where he asked folks to raise your hand if you think WP Engine is WordPress. This was kind of funny. And I love the little comment she throws in.
Those of you who knew WP Engine before, did anyone think it was like officially associated with WordPress? Raise your hand. Yeah. So
not that much.
And the legal
She says not that many.
Not that much.
Because you can't see the crowd because of the camera angle. And it's just like, damn, man, like this just feels like you're trying to illustrate this whole thing because it just as a tactic in this whole legal bout.
Yeah. I mean, I think she did a really good interview overall. I think she pushed enough. You can't be hostile in an interview.
Sure.
You can, once somebody makes it clear they're not going to answer a question, there's really no use just circling that question. He obviously is an extremely smart person and he has answers and he knows where he's going with the conversation, and this is all part of his strategy. So I guess kudos to both of them. I'll be honest, I was not expecting that. I did not think the goal of the TechCrunch thing was I thought it was going to be like, look at this, Matt, look at Automattic. Like, I did not think WP Engine was going to be the exact focus of it as like a hard-hitting interview, like a Kara Swisher style, pushback. So kudos to him for agreeing to it and for her pulling off what I thought was really a well-balanced interview.
Yeah, 100% agree. I also thought it was just going to be, just, a marketing sort of session just to kind of like have a little distraction, especially after what he blogged about not talking about it. But yeah, it was squarely about the fiasco. So want to listen to the whole episode, I'll link that in the show notes. So wherever you're listening or watching this, still no idea what's happening with WordPress. I've been asking the question, like, where are we rallying? I don't even have an answer for that right now. Ponder that question. Let me know what you think in the world of WordPress. Where can we rally? Like, how do we continue to put WordPress in a positive light as a piece of software, as a tool, as a way to publish, as a community? Where do we rally? If it's not going to be at a WordCamp or it's not going to be in the WordPress Slack because we literally don't have access to it, where do we go? How do we spin these things up, to keep things going in a positive direction? Brian, where can folks find you to say thanks?
BrianCords.com is where I've been writing, or kind of been avoiding writing at this point. And mostly YouTube and Twitter are where I hang out and interact, and all the various Slack groups as well.
The WP Minute, thewpminute.com/subscribe to stay connected. We'll see you in the next episode.